Hello everyone, my name is Martin and in this video I will show you how to configure Atavism weapons. So in order to configure items in Atavism, and in this case we will configure weapon, we need to open item, items, and here are predefined items that are included in the Atavism demo package. In order to create new item, we have to click this plus button, and in Atavism by default we have quite a few item types available for us. So we have weapon, we have armor, consumable, material, junk, quest, bag, container, ammo and tool. And most of these types have some specific parameters, like weapon have additionally damage range, auto attack configuration and so on, while for example bag will have only additionally parameter for number of slots, so we can equip this bag and it will add this number of slots to our backpack. We have also quest item, which will be dropped from resource nodes or from mobs, from loot tables, only if quest that requires this quest item will be in progress. So this item won't be dropped if for example we don't have required quest. So most of these item types are specific except consumable, material, junk, container, and these four basically have similar form parameters. And the only difference for them is basically this type name is also presented in the UI tooltip. So if you want to create new item type, you can also do this. So in this case, the last one is tool. So if we'll cancel it for a moment and open server, option choices, and let's say item, I believe it will be item type. And here we have tool, we will add something like tutorial item. Let's save it. And then in the items, if we want to create a new item now, we should be able to select tutorial item type and fill out the form. So as you can see, it's flexible and it's easy to configure. So let's get back to our weapon configuration. So for this tutorial, for this video, I will use one of the predefined item that exists in Atavism demo package. So I will navigate to swords and I will use any hand sword. It's because in the previous video we created additional slot with name third hand and we added it to our slot group. So if we'll open item, slots group, and we will select any hand, as you can see we have main hand, off hand and third hand. We can edit it here. So in the previous video we added this third hand slot just to present it, how to configure new slots, and we also added it into our UI, so we could equip this item and see it on our character. So now we will use our any hand sword as a reference, and we will create new similar item with very clean and with very basic configuration. So in order to do this, we can create a new item from here, or we can duplicate the existing one, and it will be simpler of course. So we can right click on the selected item and we can select duplicate, or in the right panel, if we'll click on three dots and we will use context menu as well, then we can select duplicate from here. So let's click duplicate. It will create the same entry for the same parameters for us, except item name. So in this case, I will rename it to tutorial, and I will keep the rest of the parameters. So basically we have icon, we have equipment display, and this will be extremely important, and we will handle this later in the video. So I will keep this as it is right now. Then we have experience, skill experience. It is useful when we want to gain experience for our skills using this particular weapon. Then we have slot type, so we can select one of these slot types. We can add more on demand, so we can add something like tutorial sort. Click save, and we have this entry in our form. Then we have slot, so this is our any hand, and here are slots that have weapon function assigned. I showed this part in the previous video. Then we have gear score, so this is some kind of points that will describe how powerful our character equipment is. This is useful for some kind of rankings, achievements, and these kind of things. And it is also presented in the UI. Then we have damage range, minimum and maximum. Then we have delay, and this is for auto attack, so this is in seconds. This is delay between auto attacks. Next we have enchant profile. Enchant profile is useful when we want to improve our weapon, our item in general. If you want to check what this profile that we have assigned here will do, we can click this edit button and we can see this configuration here. So up to level 3, it will do something, it will add some values, it will add 1% of damage. It won't affect our gear score. Enchantment will cost 10 bronze. We will have 100% to enchant to this level. When we will fail the enchantment, we can lower our item level by number or to level. So we have quite a few configurations here. We can add more stats and so on, but this is not part of this tutorial. This is just to explain what for this enchant profile is. So it's basically for leveling our items, in this case weapon. Then we have item quality. This item quality is responsible for presenting border around item. Then we can define if the item should be binding or not. So no binding in this case, but we can bind on equip, we can bind on pickup. Then we can define currency and price. So in this case it's bronze, 60. We can define passive ability that will be invoked when we will equip this item. Here we have stack limit, how many items we can stack in one slot in our backpack. For weapons that we will equip, it's usually 1. But for other elements it can be 100, 1000 or whatever you want. Then we can define if the item should be sellable in merchant, tradable between players, also sellable in auction house, if the item should be unique or not. So for example, in this case, because this is any hand item, we can equip 3 of these items. We can equip it into main hand, off hand and third hand, because we selected any hand slot, so we can equip it into 3 slots. So if I would select this as true, then I would be only able to equip 1 of these items simultaneously. So is unique means that I can equip only 1 of this item on my character. Then we can define if the item should participate into parry calculations. So if it should have a chance to parry an attack. Then we can define durability. So with each attack we can lose some durability, and if the durability will drop to 0, our item will not be usable anymore. And in Atavism we have durability, we have repair options. So repair is based on the repair to price ratio. So it will use this purchase cost value and this currency to repair this particular item. Then we can define if this item is socket, and we can define what kind of socket. It can be gems, runes, and we can add more as well. So for example, if it would be a gem that we would want to put into another item, we can also have such configuration, and it's also included in the demo. Then we can define chance that will be used when, for example, if our player will die, then we can lose this, we can drop this item from our backpack or from our inventory, from our character. And here we can define this chance. It's per item, so some items can have chance 0, some can have 50% and whatever you will set. Then we have weight, and if our character is overweight, for example, we can slow it down, or we can apply some kind of negative effect. Another field is auto attack. It's related to also this delay parameter that I mentioned before. So here we can define if this particular weapon will have some kind of auto attack. For example, by default we can have auto attack defined in our player templates, and it can be, for example, as unarmed, and we will fight with our opponents with fists. But when we will equip this item, we can override this auto attack parameter, auto attack ability, and we can, for example, swing a sword to auto attack our enemies. And the next field is ammo type. So here we can define which ammo this particular weapon will use. So it's handy for bows, pistols and such thing. And by default we have arrow and bullet, and we can add more as well. And how many these bullets or arrows will be used per ability we can define in the ability section. So for example, some simple ability can consume 1 arrow, but some kind of barrage or multiple shots can consume more than 1 ammunition. So here we are only defining type of ammo that this particular weapon will require, but how many ammunition we will use, it's configurable in the ability section. Next we have tooltip. So this tooltip will be presented when we will hover over the item. And then we have some statistics that are added into this weapon. In this case, we have 3 stats and 2 sockets. So this item, when equipped, will add 29 strength to our character, 50 parry and 50 critical. And 2 other elements are sockets. So this item can be socketed, and it can be socketed with 2 gems, because we have 2 slots for gems and 3 slots for runes. And we can add as many as we want, so we can have more sockets, more various socket types. And here we can define other effects, item effects. So it can be stat, it can use ability, it can be object, climb object. We can create climb, so we can climb some land, like a land deed or something like that. We can start a quest when we will use this item. Currency will automatically convert this item into this currency wherever we will pick up this item. So if we would select this as currency, wherever we would add or try to add this item into our backpack, it would be converted to this currency. It can be also building material, craft items, sockets you could see here. Blueprint is receipt, VIP points and VIP time. This is for premium and VIP functionality in Atavism. Bonus, so we can add some kind of bonus like additional experience, better prices for selling items, more loot chance or maybe worse loot chance, whatever you will set, auction cost, and a bit more options like you can see. So all these elements related to bonuses. Then we can define skill points, talent points. This will basically add defined number of points, in this case skill points or talent points, which we then can use to increase or level our skills or talents. We can reset skills, reset talents, and define achievement. So, for example, we can complete an achievement if we will use this weapon, this item. So this is for effects, and then the last part for items, and in this case weapon, it's a requirement. So we can add requirements, and there can be many requirements as well. So we can require player level, skill level, race, class, statistic, and guild level. So for example, we can require stat, and it will require strength, like maybe 50 or 100. So if we will have some kind of heavy sword that should be used only by very strong players, we can define any statistic with any value here to require these elements. And all of these requirements have end separators, so it's not or. So all requirements have to be fulfilled together. So if we will define level, let's say 10, and strength 100, then both of these requirements have to be met, so we could equip this weapon. But for this tutorial we won't use any requirements. We don't want to limit ourselves to equip this item. So let's save this item, and as you can see we have this item here. And now the last thing, let's open it again once more, and the last thing is this equipment display that I skipped before, and we will handle this in the Unity editor. But this is basically a prefab, as you can see, which is within our Unity editor project, and this prefab is used for presenting our model in our hands, on our back, in our rest slot. So basically handling visual aspects for our item. Without this equipment display, our item wouldn't be presented visually on our character, but only as the icon that we defined here. So now let's move to our Unity editor and let's configure this prefab. So now we are in the Unity editor. Our prefab is here, and if you will want to find it, it's also included in the Atavism demo package. So it's in the assets, resources, content, equipment display, weapons, greatsword, and here we have two prefabs with equipment display here. So the simplest way is to duplicate any of these objects. So we can click Ctrl D. Let's rename it to tutorial. And we can configure it from there, or if you want to create it completely from scratch, we can add an object to our hierarchy. So create empty, let's call it two-hand tutorial, and let's zero it. And then let's drag it here. So basically we are creating completely new and clear prefab. So except this equipment display component, which I will remove anyway to show you how to create it from scratch. It's basically the same element, the same prefab. It's just an empty prefab. So let's remove this component. So as you can see, these two are similar except the name. So now let's add the component. It will be equipment display, and here we have some parameters. So we can define type of the equip display object. In this case we will use attached object. Will be used when we will want to instantiate new object for our character. So as you can see, we can provide model and various other parameters, but let's move through the list further. So we have activated model, and this model, this option is handy for armors. For non-UMA characters, like a traditional ones, when we will want to activate or deactivate particular armor elements, armor pieces, and we will activate them by name. And this is a simplified version of the last one, but then we have texture swap, so we can swap the texture of the model name, and we can provide the material that will be used for the object. And the last element is modular armor, and this is very similar to our activated model. It's like activated model on steroids. So we have also model name, but then in addition we have some other options. We can disable some elements like helmet, like hair. We can disable some elements on our player head, so we can disable some hair, beard, and so on, as well as we can disable some shoulder elements, shoulder items here. And this particular component, particular feature was contributed by members of our community. So thank you, Duncan and the VSAT, for creating this and providing to our community. So this is handy when except only enabling particular armor type, armor element, we would like to also disable some kind of elements like hair or base character-based model mesh. Like for example, when we are equipping boots, we would like to disable feet, so to prevent from clipping and so on. So in this case, we would want to use this modular armor. Also, it's worth to mention that this modular armor feature is only for non-UMA characters. For UMA, we will use different component. So because we are configuring weapon, we will want to use attached object because we will instantiate this model, and here we will use the same model that we are using for our demo. So we will use this two-hand model. So it's simple sort. So I will drag this model here. And this is default model that will be used for all configurations that we will have below, because we can use different models, but I will describe it in details later. Then we have option like if it should be an armor or a weapon. So for example, if it would be an armor, we could also disable some hair, some beard and so on. In our case it is a weapon. And then we have two checkboxes. So we are defining if it should use rest slot. So in Atavism we have something like normal slot and rest slot. So normal slot is, for example, in case of a sword, normal slot is basically a hand, and rest slot can be like a slot on our back, where we are hiding this near our belt, where we are hiding this or keeping our weapon, and only in combat we are equipping this weapon into our hands. So in this case we want to use this rest slot. We don't want to have this weapon constantly in our hand. Another checkbox is if it should be by default equip into rest slot. This is useful mostly for tools, where, for example, if we are in combat and we will equip a tool on our character, we don't want to equip it automatically in our hand, but only when we are harvesting or we should use this tool. So this is mostly useful for tools. And this override slot I will keep for the next part, but first I will describe this last element. In Atavism we can define models based on race, class and gender. So in this case we will add a race. We can define any kind of race that we have defined in the Atavism by default. So it's human and orc, or any. We can add more options here. So if we will switch back to our Atavism editor, and let's open option choices, it will be race. So as you can see, this element is taken directly from there. So we have human and orc, and we can add more. So we can say let's tutorial race. And now if we will go back to our Unity editor to refresh the list, because the list won't be refreshed, we have to switch back and forth between any kind of items, any kind of objects. And now if we will select the list, as you can see we have tutorial race that we created in the editor. So these entries are taken directly from the Atavism database, so you don't have to code any kind of these settings. So we can define race, we can define class, and we can define gender. And the same way we can define class. So in the Atavism editor, if we will switch to class, and we will add tutorial class. Let's go back to our Unity editor. Let's refresh the list. And here, if we will select the class, we can see that we have tutorial class, and the same for gender. We can do the same for gender as well. In our case, we want to have this sort for any race, for any class, and for any gender. to be equipped in the same place, in the same slot. But in some cases we could define, for example, if we have orc and human and they are totally different models, then sometimes we would want to have different configurations for them. Because, for example, hand for our human is in a bit different place than hand for our another model like orc or dwarf, maybe because of the height or maybe because of the bone structure. And as you can see, we can also define model here. So we defined this model here as a default model, but if we would have, for example, human, only for race human, for any class and for any gender, then we could add new race, in this case let's say orc, also any class, any gender, but there we could define different item models. So for example, we could have some kind of sword, and this sword for orc would be more bloody, more rough, or with rust and so on. But for humans or for elves, it could be more shiny, more delicate and so on. So even if it would be the same item in game, we can provide different models and give more variety, more configuration to our game. But for this tutorial we will use only one model. So let's remove this race. And now we will add slot. So this is the last element that we are adding. So it's race, class, gender and slot. And here we have, as you can see, main hand, off hand and so on. So these kind of slots that we also have in our Atavism standalone editor. So the last one is third hand. And if we will go back to our standalone editor, to our slots, as you can see, we have third hand slot here. So we have main hand, we have off hand, and so on, and we have this third hand. So these slots are taken directly from there. And this is useful, this is extremely important, because in our case we have any hand weapon. This any hand weapon we can equip in any kind of slot. So we have main hand, off hand and third hand. And only the server knows where this item will be equipped, because the server knows if there is another item in the slot, if it can be equipped there, if you met the requirements and so on. So only the server knows if the item will be equipped and in which slot. And then if you are trying to equip this item, server is checking where it will be equipped and returning information to the client in which slot it was equipped. So in our case, we are defining main hand. We will define another slot which will be off hand, and another slot that will be third hand, because for each of these slots we will have different configuration, because our main hand will be right hand and the sword will be on the back, angled right. Off hand will be in our normal slot, will be in our left hand, and rest slot will be angled on the back but from the left. And third hand will be, let's say, it will be also in our right hand in this case, so it won't be the best configuration because we can have two swords in our right hand in this case, and the rest slot will be near our belt with our axe and pickaxe, for example. So I wanted to show you this third hand configuration because first it's very uncommon, but it shows the most difficult part, the most sophisticated part, where your character doesn't have to have only two hands. It can be some a snake or naga creature that will have 4-6 hands, and it gives you the idea of how configurable this system is. So it's not something only that you can use to configure very common characters, but also very uncommon characters. Of course, in our case, we don't have such model, so we have only 2 hands, so it won't be the best use case with our main slot position for our third hand, but the rest slot will show you how configurable it is. So when the server is sending information about in which slot this item was equipped, equipment display will take this information and check if it will fit to our race, class, and gender, and of course slot. So if this weapon was equipped, will be equipped into our main hand slot, then it will use this configuration, so these elements. If it will be equipped into our offhand, it will use these elements, this section, and third hand, this section. But in case where, for example, we will have a bow that usually is equipped into our offhand slot, but we will use 2-hand slots because we don't want to have bow in the left hand and sword in the right hand, because we want to shoot using the bow with the right hand. So basically the bow should use 2 slots in this case, so it's like a 2-handed weapon, but we would want to equip it into the offhand slot. By default, Atavism will equip it into the first slot, so it will be mostly main hand, and with only this configuration, it would be only the server would send information that the bow is in the main hand. We would use this configuration, and the bow would be displayed, instantiated into the right hand of our character. So how to handle this case? And in this situation, this override slot is useful. So instead of using this conditional table, let's say, conditional section, we will use this override slot. So in this case, if it would be a bow and you would want to equip it into the left hand on our character, we would have to use offhand slot here. So wherever the server will send information that the bow was equipped into the main hand, it would override the slot and use the offhand. But for our use case with sword, we won't use this override section. Now we have configuration very default with very default values with scale 1, 0 at positions and rotations for all our use cases, so for main hand, offhand and third hand. So now when we created our equipment display prefab, now we have to assign this prefab to our item. So let's switch back to our item. Let's open our tutorial item. And here is our prefab. So now we want to replace this equipment display prefab with our newly created one. So let's click choose. And here, as you can see, it opened our equipment display. So let's select weapons, greatsword, and here we have our new tutorial prefab. So let's select it. It will be populated here, as you can see, and let's click update. After that, we can restart the server to load our new configuration, and keep in mind that these buttons for start, restart and stop server will only work for our Atavism virtual machine or for Atavism cloud servers. And if you are using any kind of custom installation or Atavism Windows Manager, you have to restart your server accordingly. So for custom installation, probably from the command line, while for the Atavism Windows Manager there are also controls and buttons that can restart the server for you in the manager. Let's go back to our Unity, and the rest configuration will be handled here. I believe my server is already running, so let's enter the game. Let's create our character. Tutorial 01. It will be warrior, human race, and male. Let's create it. Let's enter the world. And here as an admin, I will just maybe change the weather to make it more visible. Let's make it default. Time of the day is pretty okay. Okay, so let's open our character, our backpack. So as you can see, there is no weapons equipped. We have 3 slots. We have main hand, offhand, and third hand that we created in the previous video. So now let's add our newly created item. So sword. Let's find it. And I will give maybe 3 of these items. So when I will equip this item, as you can see, it's somewhere on the back. It's not positioned properly. If I will equip second one, it's also not correct. And the third one, it's also definitely not correct. So now let's fix this. Let's keep only one item. So now we have to position our weapon in our game. And the best way to do this is to pause the game, switch to the scene view, so here, and now we have to select our weapon. So let's click on it. And it's important to not select a child object, but the main model, the main object. And now we are positioning it. So we know that this is main hand slot. So I want to be something like it's pretty okay. Yeah, I think it's pretty okay. And now we have to copy these values of this weapon into our weapon. So we have to open our greatsword, new tutorial, and here we have to copy this to our rest slot. So we are getting this value here. Your values can be totally different if you will use any other model, any other weapon, and so on. But in this case, I think it's pretty good aligned right now. Okay, So now we have these values, and now let's unpause it. Now let's unequip this weapon and equip it again. So as you can see, these values are properly set for our character, right? So this weapon is as we wanted on our back in the rest slot. Now we will configure offhand slot, and for this part we can use another option. So I will just remove this, let's say offhand, and I will use the copy slot 2. So it will also for any race, any class, any gender, and I will use offhand and copy slot. So as you can see, we have the same values for our offhand slot. And now if we will equip our offhand, so it's third hand, it's here, and remove main hand, it's in the same position, right? But we want to be a bit on the other side of our back. So also let's pause the game, let's select our model, but also parent object, not the child one. And here we are having the same parameters as we had for our main hand. And we want to flip it a bit, right? And move it a bit. I think something like this will work. So now we need to copy these values again into our offhand slot. Okay, so now we have these values, and let's unpause it. And now if we will equip this item into main hand, it will be rest slot position like this. Offhand will be opposite, right? Maybe it should be a bit lower, but it's all adjustable as you could see. And now we want to position the third hand slot, let's say near our belt, near our pickaxe here. So let's equip this into our third hand slot. Let's pause our game again. The sword is here. Let's select it. Also parent one. And let's adjust it, right? So, and this is interesting use case because by default on our character, if we will open resources and our challenger, we will see that we have slots on our Atavism MMORPG appearance. So we have main hand, offhand, head, chest, back, pickaxe, and axe. So we have these slots predefined, but what we should do if we wouldn't have this, right? So in this case, we want to position this sword somewhere in the slot that we doesn't have here. So in order to do this, we have to open this prefab, our character prefab, not in the scene, but in the project. Here we can just find our pickaxe, let's say. So it's right hand. Let's say rest slot, maybe this one. Okay, so this is near the belt. And we can basically define in the bone structure any kind of slot. So let's create a new one. Let's say here. Let's create empty under this bone. Let's call it third hand slot. So as you can see, it's near the belt. But let's move it maybe in the right section. So not near the pickaxe or axe slot, but opposite. And then let's select our challenger and let's add this slot. So we will add slot. It will be third hand. This third hand is selected from the Atavism standalone editor, from the slots that we created in the previous video. And now we have to drag slots here. So our sword will be in our right hand because we don't have the third hand on our character. So we will use main hand slot, right? So I will use this bone. But for the rest slot, we will select our third hand. So it was somewhere there. And now our prefab is saved. But to get this updated, we need to reload our character because this character doesn't have this new slot configuration. So we need to unpause the game first. Let's log out. And as you can see, even in the character selection scene, our sword is positioned nearly where we set our third hand slot as a rest slot. So let's enter the game and let's position it properly. So now let's pause the game. Let's select our sword, main object. Let's position it. Let me just make the gizmos smaller. Let's select the sword again. And now let's scale it down, maybe to 0.5, maybe to 0.6. Because we don't want to have this huge sword near our belt. Okay, something like this would, I believe, work. Okay, I believe something like this would work. So now we will copy these values again and copy them into our third hand rest slot parameters. What is also worth to mention is that this configuration for weapons will work for Yuma and non-Yuma characters. So in this case we are configuring it with traditional one, but it will also work the same with Yuma character. And now we will adjust our scale to 0.6. And now unpause the game. So as you can see, this sword is a bit smaller. Now let's unequip it and equip it. So main hand, third hand, and off hand. And now if we will try to use ability, all swords will be equipped into our hands. Of course, we have the same sword equipped twice in our main hand. So if we will just unequip these two, right, this main hand and third hand will be in the same position. But if you would want to adjust this as well, we would have to enter the combat, let's say, and adjust this weapon. So we can pause the game. Let's move to our character, select our sword, and let's say we would want to just position this maybe more vertically. Yeah, something like this would work probably, just to show you the idea. And then it's for our main hand, let's say main hand rotation. So if we will unpause it, this sword is more vertically. If you would equip third hand, it will be the old position, because we didn't set this position for our third hand. So now it's more obvious that we have two weapons in this hand. And when the combat will be over, our swords will be back on our rest slots. So as you can see, it's very configurable, very flexible, and easy to do. Once you will get familiar with it, it will be pretty fast to configure other elements, because you can even copy positions if your weapons will be very similar in shape. And as I showed you, you can even configure more than 2 hands elements, items, weapons, even if our model wasn't prepared for this. But at least we could configure rest slot properly in this case to show you how to do this. A bit more complex configuration and more complex use case. So thanks for watching. I hope you like this video and that it will be helpful for you in your MMORPG development journey. So bye bye, and see you in the next video.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Atavism YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to be alerted when new videos on Atavism are released. Have a great day and happy developing.